Hey everybody, here's our Bible study for this week. We're going to be in Mark chapter 1. We're talking about the power of Jesus revealed not just in the city of Capernaum, but in our own lives as well. So let's jump in and see what we have here today. Mark chapter 1, verses 21 through 28 says this. And they went to Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath day he entered the synagogue and was teaching. And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority, not as the scribes. I actually find that really interesting. We'll come back to it in a minute. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent, and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. So today our text our text displays the power of Jesus to those around him. Jesus entered the synagogue on this particular Sabbath day, and he began to teach those around him. And this shouldn't be unfamiliar. As we read the New Testament, we find that Jesus taught in many places. He often entered the synagogue and taught. He would teach on a hillside, as in the Sermon on the Mount. He taught in a number of different places. What might seem unfamiliar to us is that the scribes seemed to teach with an authority that Jesus did not possess. So if you don't know what the scribes were like the CEO of a company. They were the experts in the law, and their mission was to read the law and interpret it, help people understand what the law actually said and how they were supposed to live life by it. And they did that based on not their own opinions. It wasn't a motivational speech. It was on the experts. It was on the opinions of other experts and other scholars. And so I want you to be aware of this. There are those who claim to teach the Bible on TV, on the radio, on podcasts, anywhere on the internet. There are those who claim to teach the Bible, and they do it without God's authority tapping into their lives on the subject. They open up their Bible and they never, ever even consider what God might have to say on it. They just talk and ramble on, and they give you a nice motivational speech that might help you be the best you. But what they have in mind about who you are to be might not be what God has in mind for you to be. And so I want to give you that warning. Verse 23 says, "Immediately there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit." This should remind us that every person that attends church is not walking in the light of Jesus or experiencing the power of Jesus in their life. There are people in church every weekend that carry unclean spirits with them over and over and over. They are the lost sheep that have found their way into church. So the conversation, let's go to verse 25, the conversation, "But Jesus rebuked him." So a man with an unclean spirit walks into the temple, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? But you come to destroy us. You should note that the man is not the person speaking. The unclean spirit is the one that's speaking. The man is singular, us is plural. And so the conversation that is happening in verses 25, verse 26, is not a conversation between Jesus and the man, but between Jesus and the unclean spirit. As the power of Jesus is revealed in this passage, the unclean spirit declares who Jesus is, and he submits to the authority of God. And if we take the time to look at the unclean spirit, we find that we should be able to learn that submission is not optional when we stand before the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. It's not optional. The unclean spirit had to submit to the power of Jesus in this situation as a created being who was looking at his creator in his eyes. The proof is in verse 27. The crowds were amazed at the demonstrated power of Jesus. Verse 27, they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority?" The man walked into the synagogue with an unclean spirit and walked out a redeemed, restored individual. Now the crowds missed it. They were amazed, but they were not convicted. They were amazed but not transformed. They were amazed, but their lives did not change whatsoever. Jesus' fame spread and more people began to follow because they didn't want to miss another show. They didn't want to miss another miracle. They didn't want to miss another performance. They were more interested in being entertained than they were about experiencing the life-changing power of Jesus in the situation. And so I want to say this to you. Think about this. We might miss the work that God is doing inside of us if we're paying too much attention to the events around us. So let me say it another way. We might miss the work that God is doing inside of us if we're not paying attention to what God is actually doing or trying to do inside of us. So give proper attention to what God is doing inside of you instead of what God is doing around you. Let's go to verse 35. It says this, "And rising very early in the morning," this is actually really key. This is a good discipline for you to develop in your life. "And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And Simon," that's Peter. If you read the verses before this, you'll find that Peter's mother-in-law was sick, and they went and Jesus healed his mother-in-law. Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." Like maybe he's ticked because he's off and they're just doing their thing. Jesus is praying, being alone with God, and everyone's looking for him. Like, it's time. It's time. Everyone's here. The paparazzi's here. Let's go. This is the show. Let's get it on. And Jesus said to them in a very Jesus-esque way, "Let's go on to the next town so I can preach there. For that is why I came out." And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. If you write in your Bible, you can write Luke 19:10 next to these verses. It says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Jesus was on mission like no other person ever on the face of the earth. He knew his mission well, and he cared deeply for the people that he was leaving behind in Capernaum. For the crowds, they weren't interested. They wanted to be entertained. They didn't want transformation. Jesus cared deeply for them. But he knew their hearts. He knew that they didn't really want to be redeemed or restored. They weren't interested in Jesus' search and rescue mission. In order to be found, we must first realize that we're lost. If you are perfectly content with being entertained by the thought of Jesus, then you might not realize that you're lost. If you're perfectly content in your mediocre life, your religious setting, if you're perfectly content in your complacent Christianity that has Jesus as a knickknack in your bedroom or a centerpiece or something on your shelf, and really not something that, not a relationship that goes everywhere with you, you're really no different than these people. You're really no different than the people who just wanted to be entertained and really not transformed. So Jesus moved on to another city, and he continued to preach and cast out demons. He continued to redeem, he continued to restore, he continued to live on his mission. When the power of Jesus is demonstrated in our life, it is our responsibility to acknowledge it and to submit it. The people in Capernaum missed it. The people in Capernaum could have had a very different future. They just weren't interested. That's so true of us. It's so true of our lives. There are just some days that we are not interested. We'd rather go about doing our own thing, and sometimes our own thing just has nothing to do with the mission of God. Jesus knew it was time to move on because verse 35 tells us, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed, and he went out to a desolate place and he prayed. Jesus, early in the morning, got up, got alone, maybe poured a cup of coffee, maybe not, but he was by himself to speak with the Father and to listen to the Father. That's how he knew what his mission was, and if he was on mission, if he wasn't on mission. So let me say to you, if you're not sure about the power of Jesus or the work of God in your life, are you taking the time to be alone with God? Are you taking the time to talk to God? Are you taking the time to listen to God? Are you taking the time to be around God when nobody else is around you? You know, we might miss the work that God is doing inside of us if we're paying too much to the events around us. We might miss the work of God. We might miss the work that God is doing inside of us if we aren't listening well. There's one more. Mark 1 verses 35 says this, and he went through all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, if you will, you can make me clean. Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand. Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I will. Be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. In verses 29 through 34, we see one incident when Jesus was healing the physical needs of those around him. But most of this chapter records Jesus inside different synagogues, preaching and casting out demons. Like, there's no indication here that Jesus had left the synagogue. He went in the synagogue, he's preaching, and he's casting out demons. And there's every indication says the leper went into the synagogue where Jesus was. The man recognized the power of Jesus on display. He didn't want to miss what God might do in his life. And because he saw that he had a need that nobody else could cure, that the only redemption and restoration could come at the feet of Jesus, he went to where Jesus was. And he took a risk. Leprosy was highly contagious. If it is more highly contagious than the coronavirus. Jesus put himself at risk simply to have a conversation with the man. And the leper surrendered to the power of Jesus in that situation. His surrender resulted in immediate redemption and restoration. For verse 42, and immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. So we might miss the work that God is doing inside of us if we're paying too much attention to the events around us. If we aren't speaking to the Father and listening well, and if we're unable to surrender to the power of Jesus in our lives. So listen, folks, wherever you are today, whichever couch you're sitting on, or how sick of you are of being at home, you want to get out, you want life to get back to normal, this is a great time of life to evaluate whether or not you're paying attention to the work that God is doing inside of you. You have plenty of time. You have more time than ever, and maybe ever will in the future, to get alone by yourself and to speak with the Father and to listen well. You have more time than you ever had or may ever again have to seek redemption and restoration in your life. You have more time than you ever have or ever might have again to surrender to the power of Jesus in your life. And I think that there are just people around us that are more concerned with being entertained with Jesus than actually being redeemed by Jesus. So I want to invite you to consider the words, consider the power of Jesus revealed in Mark 1, but consider the power of Jesus revealed in your life. And how are you doing seeking it out? How are you doing surrendering? How are you doing at spending time daily talking to Jesus and listening to him? So hey, I hope you're doing well. I hope that you continue to stay safe, and I'll see you again soon.